Welcome back. In a moment we'll continue our discussion on men's mental health, but first here are some other stories to keep an eye on. The US Department of Justice says 2 white police officers who killed a black man in Baton Rouge last July will not be charged. The death of 37-year-old Alton Sterling sparked days of protest in the state of Louisiana and prompted a civil rights investigation. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have provisionally agreed a meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Germany in July. Speaking on the telephone, the US and Russian presidents agreed to try and meet face-to-face. They also discussed the war in Syria and the growing tensions on the Korean peninsula. And demonstrators in Venezuela have labelled a call from the country's president to rewrite the constitution a coup. Protesters once again took to the streets, setting up roadblocks in defiance of Nicolas Maduro's calls for the new constitution. Venezuela has been in the midst of a political crisis since the death of its former leader, Hugo Chavez, in 2013. Well, let's return to our conversation about mental health, and in particular, the mental health of young men. With us today, the psychotherapist, Lucy Beresford, and Mark Rowland, a director of the charity Mental Health Foundation. Lucy Beresford, in understanding why this affects human beings, are we now quite sophisticated as who's going to be more vulnerable? I'm going to put a scenario to you where maybe 2 siblings from the same family undergo circumstances which are far from ideal. I don't know, a broken home, perhaps an abusive father, something like that. Do they necessarily come out of that as 20-somethings the same?
No, that's the amazing thing about human development, and it is quite hard to pinpoint. The debate still runs about nature or nurture, but that's a classic scenario where you've got 2 people who arguably have gone through the same event with the same surrounding environment, but they may be very different when they come out of it. And you can map brain changes, you can map sort of stress levels, but it is hard to pinpoint. So
sibling sympathy is not necessarily forthcoming, because the one might be his attitude to these set of circumstances is quite different to the other.
And what you find in later life is that it's very unfortunate if your sibling does not agree with your view or your version of events and can't provide that corroborative evidence, and that will often exacerbate any feelings of anguish that you might have. Yes, I don't understand why you have this issue with our parent, because for me, I was the golden child, and therefore, it doesn't really matter. And we see that a lot in big traumatic experiences. We often think that if you've gone through something with somebody, you might actually have that share that bond. But my father, for example, was in a prisoner of war camp during World War II, and he came out of it relatively unscathed, and I know that there were other people who didn't. So it's hard, but at the same time, we must never underestimate someone's reporting of what they went through. That's the key, to listen to someone's experience.
Here's another worry, though. Is it always best to get it out there? Because there may be a fear that actually by discussing this issue, this feeling, maybe suicidal thoughts with somebody else, you're going to make it worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think all our advice is you've got to make sure that the person that you disclose to is someone that you trust, and that you make sure that the timing is right. And there certainly are some circumstances where talking about it won't be productive, but in the main, I would agree with Lucy that the problem is on the other side in terms of a preference not to talk about it and to bottle it up. But I think, in terms of our societal understanding of mental health, we've started with an assumption that sort of poor mental health was something to do with almost witchcraft or the demonic. And then we've understood that potentially it's actually a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's actually a completely biological thing. And I think what we're understanding, and I think the latest evidence is showing, is that it is the environment that you're raised in that has the biggest influence on the quality of your mental health. And certainly, if you were to take out, magically, all child abuse and all exploitation of children, you'd make a massive contribution. Something like 30% of all mental health would be sort of eradicated overnight. So we know that that is a massive trigger for deteriorating mental health outcomes.
The extremes are sort of easy to understand, aren't they? And I understand the metaphor. If you've got a broken leg, people know it's got to be plastered, doctors have got to fix it. So if you've got something major wrong with your brain, of course it needs sorting out. What about the other side of life, where maybe, I'm not healthy enough, I actually should lose a bit of weight, or I should go and get fitness for my body? What's the way we should learn to keep your mind healthy and fitter. Can we help ourselves?
We can definitely help ourselves, and it's why I think mental health should be discussed in schools. And another thing that is being introduced into a lot of school curriculums is things like meditation and mindfulness, because that's a way in which you can actually train people from a very early age.
You can learn disciplines, can you?
Yes, and learn to develop a language for how you're feeling, learn skills so that you can understand what someone else is saying to you, or what cues you might be picking up so that you can be alert to what your friends might be going through, or maybe even what your parents are going through, so that you can understand that kind of thing. But at the same time, compassion is a huge life skill, and it's really important because there are so many things that we do go through and we beat ourselves up about. And frankly, you know, if I was attacked or challenged in a supermarket by somebody saying the kind of things that I might say to myself in my head, you know, that person would be escorted off the premises. And yet we don't really pay attention to the fact in which we might be sabotaging our own well-being.
But does spiritualness, does a faith, does religion play into this?
Not for everyone, but for many people it does. And it depends what you talk about.
As part of a general mental health, I'm thinking that there is other extra worldly things it's worth thinking about.
People talk about formal religion, people talk about spirituality. It could be angels, it could be crystals, it could be going running and getting all those feel-good endorphins sloshing around your system. Whatever works for you, let's not denigrate anything.
It's finding what works for you, Mark. Exactly. Is that a challenge? You need to try and seek it out.
And I think one of the main messages that we're saying is that there's a massive difference between being on autopilot, letting life hit you, and being on the front foot, coming off and being intentional about what is it that works for you. What of all of the stuff that you've been told about who you are and what you should do in life, what works for you, what's bringing you energy, what's bringing you joy. And actually that is some hard work, and that doesn't just happen overnight. And that's why therapy can be incredibly powerful in helping people explore that. But just simply the process of waking up each morning and making decisions that work, that protect you. For me, walking from my station to my office every morning makes a big difference. And I am encouraged because, you know, you go into schools now. My son's 10, he's doing yoga on a Tuesday morning, and I went into the classroom. I tried to tell him about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, and he went, "Don't worry, Daddy, I've got it up on my school chart." And I was amazed to see that this is a generation who is going to be learning this stuff.
They're much more emotionally literate than we ever were. And even if it's just coming, you talk about walking at the beginning of the day, some people get a gratitude book out and they write down the 3 things that they're grateful for at the end of the day.
Right.
We're not necessarily talking about spending oodles of money here.
No.
It's just simply about working out what gives you peace and what gives you that feeling of well-being. And you're right to talk about loneliness and the contrast with the community, because I think, again, we're relational creatures. We grow up connected to another person. We have to remember that that is probably where most of us are going to get most of our well-being, whether it's joining a choir, meeting people on the terraces at a football match, or just what it isn't.
It might not happen automatically. That's the thing. It might need a bit of work.
It might not happen overnight, but then you wouldn't expect to have the Greek god body that you have. It takes a lot of work to get in shape, doesn't it, Martin?
It takes a lot of work.
But if it's social media that is your benchmark and your sense of value, and you're seeing all of the people in your Facebook feed who are seemingly having this amazing airbrushed life, then you yourself may start to feel quite challenged and despairing of your situation. So it is about what you can do to turn that around.
All right. We have to end our conversation there. Lucy Beresford and Mark Rowland, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Inside.